Good morning, good afternoon, dear guests. My name is Iryna Skubii. I'm the inaugural Mykola Zerov Fellow in Ukrainian Studies at the University of Melbourne, and I will be chairing this event. I want to begin acknowledging that this event is organized in Australia, Melbourne, the land of Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who are traditional owners of this land and where the University of Melbourne stands. I would like to pay respects to the elders, past and present, and as I'm speaking today from Lviv in Ukraine, I also would like to pay respects to the traditional owners of Ukrainian lands who are currently fighting back against Russian invasion. Thank you for our audience for waiting and for joining us today. This is third webinar in the series of 4 events titled Ukraine Writes Back, Writers, Poets and the War. It is organized jointly by the Research Initiative on Post-Soviet Space at the University of Melbourne and the Ukrainian Studies Association in Australia and New Zealand. My colleagues, co-organizers of this event, are present here in the Zoom audience. Professor Marko Pavlyshin, Professor Mark Idili, Associate Professor Julie Feder, and Associate Professor Alessandro Acili, and my colleague Dr. Olga Maxwell. Today's webinar is focused on the theme of fighting, living and writing, being inside the war, and invites our speakers and writers today, Yaryna Chornoguz and Viktoriia Grivina, who have direct experience of living in Ukraine, fighting in Ukraine, whether on the front lines or in Kharkiv, a city under daily bombardments, and they will reflect with us on their writing during the war and read from their poetry and prose about frontline, about occupied cities, about landscapes of soil, rivers and seas, and the objects and dreams they hold onto, their emotions and dangers of life amidst war atrocities in Ukraine. A couple of housekeeping matters. We encourage the audience to ask questions to the panelists, to our distinguished writers. You can submit your questions using the Q&A button of the bottom of the screen. And my colleague, Dr. Olga Maxwell, senior lecturer at the School of Languages and Linguistics, will help us to facilitate this discussion and collect your question to the writers. I also would like to mention that this event, this webinar is recorded, and first webinars in this series are already posted online on RIP's YouTube channel, and I invite you to watch them when you have time. So let me introduce finally our speakers. Yaryna Chornoguz is a Ukrainian poet, translator, civic activist, and active duty service member. Currently, Yaryna is serving as AUV operator at the Ukrainian Marine Corps. She began her military path in 2019 as paramedic with a volunteer medical battalion hospital years, and later she signed a contract with the Marine Corps of Ukrainian Armed Forces. For her service, Yaryna has been awarded the Medal for Military Service for Ukraine and for a Saved Life. And alongside her military service, Yaryna is a prize-winning writer and translator. She graduated with a master's degree from the National University of Kyiv-Mohyla Academy in 2019, and she participated in numerous poetry readings, competitions, including Smoloskip Publishing Prize. Her poetry collection, Design, Defense of Presence, was awarded the Taras Shevchenko National Prize of Ukraine. It is the country's highest literary award. Yaryna is the author of 3 poetry collections for now, one of which came out recently, and I have it on my desk now. So you are very welcome to buy and read the newest poetry published very recently. And our very distinguished also speaker from Kharkiv, Viktoriia Grivina, is a writer and cultural anthropologist from Kharkiv in Ukraine. She holds a master's degree in linguistics of Kharkiv National University and MA in cultural studies via Erasmus Mundus Master's Scholarship. In 2021, she was an early career researcher in an archiving post-industry project, digitizing photographic legacy of Donbas in Ukraine. Currently, Viktoria is a PhD researcher at the University of St Andrews, and she is working on transformation of culture and aesthetic landscapes of Kharkiv during the war. In 2024, Viktoria was shortlisted for Creative Future Nonfiction Award and received first prize at Dream Foundry Fantastic Fiction competition. Her first book, an essay collection, Kharkiv Is City, is published in spring this year in 2025, and also Viktoria quoted with her colleagues Hjørdis, Clemmensen, Vasylysa, Shchogoleva, another new book on Kharkiv, Kharkiv Is a Dream, Public Art and Activism from 2013 till 2023. So I would like to begin by asking both of our writers first question about how your poetry and writing about the war changed during the time of war, during your serving in armed forces, as in case of Yaryna. Do you see a change in how you are thinking and reflecting about the war, about your personal experience in your collections? For example, Yaryna published in 2023 Design that includes poetry written in 2022. And in her most recent collection, published in 2025, Як вигинається коло or Нічний шафран, you also have very different experiences. So maybe you can reflect on this. And for Viktoria, I also would like to ask if you can elaborate on your experience of writing during the war and how it changed. And what also prompted both of you to write and publish these books and essays about Kharkiv, about military service, and you can certainly respond with some examples from your poems or writing and share with us your poetry. Are there any, Yaryna, would you like to start?
Okay, thank you for presentation and thank you for invitation to this webinar. For me, it's a little bit unuseful because I'm here in Kherson, and it's quite unusual to have a conversation on academic topics, but I will try to do my best. Talking about poetry, well, I always loved in poetry mythology, archetypes. I always had this sincere language, but I loved to work with this things in my poetry. After I got frontline experience, I think my poetry become more like got more motives of testimonies and maybe become more direct and sincere, I would say, because for all of us who writes on the front line, writing and poetry, this is a way, to relieve stress a little bit, to express some thoughts and opinions which you cannot do in another way. That poetry allows you to be very open, very generous in what you really feel. So I got this more of this in my poetry, I think. For me, it looks like it become darker, a lot darker. Sometimes it is a little bit traumatic, even for me, when I read it for public, for example, or I don't like rereading my poetry written in this time, honestly, because it's you have to remember all those things which you want to forget. So that's what I can tell generally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we'll come back to examples later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Yaryna, for your words. For me, the war started when the war started in 2014. I think I was still looking for my voice, and as I think of it now, my first essay that I wrote about Georgia, strangely, the country was in the summer 2014 when I came to Georgia, and I felt the solidarity with Ukrainians at that time of the Georgian people. And I think that probably, unfortunately, my whole writing career goes along the war. And of course, since 2022, it got darker, and you cannot do anything with it, because I thought that I wrote a funny book of humorous sketches, and then I got the feedback from people who started reading this book that they were crying, and it was not my intention. I did not, but yes, this darkness, surely it crawls into the words, and somehow even the funniest situation that you have in your head comes on the page darker and probably more like sadder in a way. So yeah, that is true.
Yeah, thank you both for sharing your personal experience of how you're writing and how it's changed during the time of war. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not 1 year, so you can already see this transition of like in your methods of writing, what you're writing about, and the way the emotions you experience during the writing, and certainly it's already a significant time, so you can see yourself this on your own personality and experience. And now we can move to more specific examples of your writing, and probably also as a way to start this, we can start talking about writing about the war and the city, because both you are based like for significant time like in the cities, and also like the cities that are in the front line. And can you both tell us about your writing about war and the city, and how you experience war in urban spaces, and also how the city continues to live during the conflict, as you also like see the everyday life of the city and how people live during the city, and why is the image of particular city or city in general is important for your writing, and what does it convey to readers about the nature of this war, about also your personal experiences, and also like the way how you see this war, like what is the place of the city in your writing, and your understanding of the current war.
Oh, yeah, I think I can start about this. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I saw lots of frontline cities actually, and I lived in like frontline, maybe towns and villages mostly. But about cities, for me, it mostly Kherson. For those who don't know, the city, yes, on the bank of Dnipro, and so the front line is a river, and Kherson is on the right bank of Dnipro, and other cities like Severodonetsk, for example, on the beginning of the full-scale invasion, which was for us a rare city, and in a few months it became frontline city. And Mariupol, which the loss of which was for lots of militaries who was in Ukraine armed forces even before full-scale invasion. It felt like a great loss, and it's this city. The image of this city is I think very important in writings of all poets and writers in Ukraine right now, especially those who are in military. And Slovyansk, for example, which is the city which is on rare, but at the same line, it's very important frontlines, near frontline, pre-frontline city. where lots of militaries can feel just a little bit comfort while they are in fights in Donetsk region. Well, I have poems about the cities, and Kherson, for example, or cities where war is very near, are felt like, to say that, they are felt like city which live in the realities of apocalypse, where you can find some very interesting stretches of people who try to keep normal life, but it's not normal life anymore. Like in Kherson, I remember, for example, autumn 2023, when it was liberated from Russians, but there were still very, very not many people, and you see, you can take a walk on the city center at nighttime, and it is beautiful buildings, old buildings from 19th century, and everything empty, and you hear artillery all the time. Then there were drones. Next year there were lots of FPV drones, like flying grenades, and every day is a big risk for everyone who lives in that city. So, but most of people have used to it, also in very surrealistic manner. In my poem, Frontline City, this is about Kherson. I'm describing one of these moments when you live not far away from Dnipro, just two streets up from Dnipro, where is the front line actually is, and from the bank which Russians try to attack all the time. And you hear artillery all the time, you hear drones. You know about that the woman who allowed your unit or our group live in her house were killed with shrapnel a few days ago. And you still drink coffee, you walk this very empty street, you see lots of DAOs who starving because not many food, and it's devastated everything. And I try and lots of buildings with windows blocked with like закрытие, blocked with something. Yeah, this is felt like this, very, like you are living in apocalypse, but you pretend to have a normal life.
Well, thank you, Yaryna. And yeah, you can later share some of your poetry about some of these cities, and maybe Viktoria can continue.
Yeah, of course, it's difficult to compare experiences because I'm a civilian and a person who was not in Ukraine when the full-scale invasion started. So I first came home in the June of 2022, and I wrote that Kharkiv and Ukraine and everything was like a Schrödinger's cat, because in the news you see that everything is gone and destroyed, especially in the news, Western news at that time. And you kind of hope that it is not. And I know many people who will not come back to Kharkiv, for instance, because they do not want to reshape their image of the city. They want to remember it as it was, in this naive, childish way, in a magical thinking way. And when I came to Kharkiv for the first time, it was the day of happiness, because I saw that not everything is destroyed. So there are still things that are standing, and I was positively surprised, and I felt that Kharkiv was like this street cat that has all the torn ears and everything. And of course, the situation can change every second, because in 2021, as you've mentioned, I worked in these little towns of Donetsk region, and I wrote an essay of an anthem of love for the little town of Pokrovsk, which I call the perfect town of Donbas. And I'm sure that in Australia there are these little quiet, pretty towns where roads are being mended, and flowers and so on, and where local museums and creative people are trying to do something interesting with it. And for me, it was Pokrovsk, which is now like in the middle of the battle, unfortunately. And you can see the urbicides, this many thousands little urbicides, destruction of identities of the cities, of these places. These histories are being erased, and in a strange way, for me, Pokrovsk Museum, this little amazing museum, remained because its director is in Dnipro now, and she is the museum now, and she has become this building for me. So in a way, we first need to think about people, and if people survive, these built infrastructures can be rebuilt. But yes, it will never be the same at the same time. So there is a big feeling of loss, and loss of innocence and naivety, that the world is good in a way, so yeah, sorry for long blabbering.
No, all is very important. Thank you, Viktoria, for adding this. I just also would like to mention to our audience, joining us from Australia, that also there are many other cities who are currently fighting to stay despite the war. For instance, in Slobozhanщина in Kharkiv region, there is city Kupiansk, whereas now only 700 residents remained, and the city is now another frontline city in the eastern of Kharkiv region, almost on the border with Luhansk region, and there is a river Oskil is dividing now occupied territory and Ukrainian territory. So it's always like this, and unfortunately our memories of these places are connected with the native cities, native villages, and if we remember big cities and they are always in the news, there is not as much information, unfortunately, about the villages that are almost obliterated by the missiles, bombardments, and so on and so forth. And what remained after these destructions, we see only the nature and how it is shaped by the war. So now my next question is about other topics that you are writing about, and the presence of nature amidst these atrocities. Your writing was about soil, rivers, seas, the broader environment, and you both mentioned, like Yaryna mentioned, doves during the war, different animals who appears prominently in your book. And this seems to contrast with your reflections on the city and the impact of war and on urban landscapes, while at the same time you are critical also of the simplistic and romanticized approaches to the land. And it's very interesting and important to find these critical reflections in your writing. So maybe you can share with us, how do you navigate the balance between a love of land, witnessing the devastations of war, your emotions about nature and landscapes that are impacted by this violence and warfare, And also, you still find place and find important to stress that despite all of these atrocities, the most precious and of the most highest value is a human life. So how to keep the central message in your writing, and how to connect all of these living words, natural world, animal world, like human world, and still be true with your readers.
This is an interesting question, because war is not useful, of course, for nature. I saw in my frontline and combat experience a few places of Ukrainian nature, or like, environments, natural environments which were destroyed, or mostly totally destroyed. For example, we have the spot on the front line, which is called Serebryansky Forest. This is a place in Donetsk region on the north from Slovyansk, the territory which was liberated by us in also autumn 2022. And this forest, this is a big forest. It was in a very like important environment, which was under our state's corona, як це сказати?
Defense?
Security, yeah, defense, under state defense. So it was like important natural environment, also with big chalk mountains on the other bank of Sieversky Donets. And we have still from 2022 up to now, autumn 2025, so 3 years, this is a very harsh frontline territory, and this forest is destroyed. Like we with our soldiers even compare the photos from that direction. Like when in autumn 2022, it was big forest with lots of trees. It was safe for soldiers. You could hide yourself, make shelter anywhere. Even we, on that direction, we didn't dig actually trenches. It was holes in the earth. It was enough of holes because it was difficult to dig a big trenches, and we just did holes in the earth. Now, after 3 years, like it turns to the field, to the field, and there are lots of animals which were killed or which were migrating from this forest to the west. Yeah. And well, in my first poetry book, I have, I think, 3 or more poems where I mentioned this forest, this direction, and Sieversky Donets, the river, which was also very polluted because of this. But everything of that looks very, very small and little if we compare to flood which we had when Russians destroyed Dambu in English.
Dam.
Так і буде. A dam here where I am, a little bit on the north in near Nova Kakhovka, and this was like thousands of species were killed because of this. And what to do with that? Well, I also, as a military and soldier, saw how nature is, how it's survives and even wins wars. So in a year or in a few months after combat actions are silent on some directions, the nature renews itself. And it's also truth, and it gives lots of hope when nature shows that it can be renewed so quickly after combats.
Thank you, Yaryna. So unfortunately, we are witnessing both destructions and also the renewal, and amidst such atrocities, and it's particularly difficult to see how the war is changing the landscapes and people around them. Maybe Viktoria can also share her experience of writing about nature as a part of Kharkiv landscape and Kharkiv streets. Is it also like a part of your writing as well?
Yes, I'm writing about Kharkiv and the Kharkiv region mostly, but also about some places like Azov, for instance, which was an important place for me. And Yaryna mentioned Siversky Donets. It is the river of my childhood, and it is the river where that is connected with many legends and local lores, And of course, when you see that, for instance, my parents' country house was occupied in the first months of the full-scale war, it was just at the intersection in this artificial lake, Pechenishske Reserve, that is connected with the Siversky Donets. And when we first came to our country house, when it was deoccupied, I saw signs, mines everywhere. And of course, when all of your childhood is connected with walking to this lake and swimming on its shores. And when you come to this, look at this beach and see this sign mines, it is a spellbinding experience. It is mesmerizing in this horrible, strangely horrible way. And of course, locals are still going and swimming there. There is no going about that. And for me, it was funny how on the first year and the second year, my parents did not swim there because they are from the city, so they're not locals, and they did not feel. They felt, no, we have to be responsible and so on. But slowly, because summers are so hot and you want to swim, and they started to ask their friends, where do you think there is a little like footpath that was sort of demined and that is sort of safe-ish. And they started thinking about it. And this year, when we were driving to my country house, I saw like the amount of cars at this exact little entrance to the forest that, now all the people have absolutely lost. And it is interesting how we are animals and we are nature and we are part of it all. So we are also renewing our human paths to these lakes and to this richness of the earth. But at the same time, you realize that all of these people are endangering themselves and their children as well. And it is, I think, that living in Kharkiv or in Kharkiv region or in any region that has been affected by mines, by military action, there will always be this feeling that we are not entirely this land does not entirely belong to us anymore, that it is still a little bit, still belongs to those Russian weapons as well. And this is a strange and horrifying effect of war as well. So
yeah, it's true. I'd like also add the thing that for example, rivers, they play a really great role in defense, and this make them very mythological even in perception, because for example, where I'm here, Kherson, the city would be devastated if not the river. The same on lots of other directions. So rivers play a very great role in defense of the land, in military understanding, for instance. And yes, about what Viktoria said, that this terrible thing, the loss of control on some places, rivers, cities, which belong to your nation, to your country, and now we all don't control that. It has very strong psychological effect actually on every Ukrainian, and of course it is reflected in all of the books which are written in this time. For example, on my poetry for sure, and we are likely to miss for these rivers and towns and forests and shores of the sea, like for people, like for dearest people. I have this motif also in my poetry that geographical places are like people, and sometimes we even talk with them and refer to them as the people, which is quite odd. For example, for modern poetry, if we talk about peaceful times in any other countries, but in other realities, it's not odd. It's our reality.
Thank you both for sharing, and also like it reminded me an example when I was this week in Kharkiv. There was a man I was also like surprised to see fishing on in the center of the city in Kharkiv, on the river Kharkiv, like just amidst air alert. He was fishing, and he was just enjoying being amid the city and trying, I guess, to control the situation and living his normal life. In the same way, we also remember this places of like nature, forest, river basins as our memory of childhood, of pre-war life. And certainly it's it's very important that you keep writing about it and keep these memories of these places in your writing. As many of such places, unfortunately, are now devastated, but it's good to remember the way how they looked like before the war and what emotions it conveys through your prose and writing. Also, I would like to touch on another question related to completely different focus of your writing. It's about materiality of war. So going back from nature to material objects, which are now certainly materiality of war is constant presence in your writing, in your text, and our readers can probably also find in your poetry and prose different examples when you're writing about ballistic missiles, drones, weapons, and in particular a memory about the objects that are left behind in occupied regions of Ukraine. And also it's about your memory of these spaces, about these places, about objects that they are lost. So can you tell us more about this, and how do these elements of material objects, materiality of warfare, and everyday life that was lost shape your poetry and your message to the readers?
Well, in my second poetry book, Design, The Defense of Presence, which was written actually from 2021 to 2023, these years, and all full-scale invasion, there is a cycle of poems which is called Lost in Occupation. There are 3 poems, and in these 3 poems, I am reflecting about this thing about objects which are lost on the war, and because soldiers usually lost a lot of stuff on the war. For instance, for me, the biggest experience in this was first months of full-scale invasion, when our platoon was, we were just had almost a month of moving from one spot to another spot. It was very cold. It was very like winter weather. And before that, we were already 8 months on the front line, so we had lots of stuff with ourselves, and all of this was in our big truck, military truck, like over 40 or 50 big bowls, these military bags. And it was somewhere moving, and we were only in that what we had on ourselves, and maybe small backpacks with us. And still in fights, this truck was exploded. It was spotted by Russian artillery, and all our stuff was in fire. Also, we lost even these small backpacks in this process of fighting on the field, in these small villages from which we went to, stepped back from one village to another village, doing what we can. And for example, I lost my laptop. I lost my notebook with lots of useful writings for me as a poet and writer. I hope it was in fire and it wasn't in hands of occupants. And lots of in others, like really expensive stuff. But well, finally in this cycle of poems, I'm writing that it's not useful to miss. It's not right to miss the things which you lost in war, because love and life returns them to you in a very sophisticated other way sometimes, that everything you can have again. So this one of the things which war and active defense from occupation is learning everyone, that it doesn't matter if you lose important, valuable things in war, because the most valuable is life, and you shouldn't miss for them. Sometimes it was difficult in the beginning to understand how much we all lost of objects that we actually, I don't know, used to. But in the end, it doesn't matter. Every soldier in Ukraine has a big history of objects which he lost in the war. Yes, and everyone could write a book, I think, about these objects.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Yaryna. I remember when I was reading this poetry that you mentioned about things lost in occupation, it also kind of reminded me that the last message of this poetry, of your poetry, was that, you know, human life is the most precious, and even if we are feeling very, you know, we are feeling lost about lost family albums, houses, and our, you know, childhood in these places where we were born. The most important that people who lived there with us are alive, that like your colleagues, soldiers are alive, and certainly it's possible to get back objects or buy new, but the most important is life, which is precious, especially during the war. So it's really important that you remind us about it. And it's important not to forget. Viktoria, would you like?
Yeah, I will.
And also, I would like to remind, if at any point of our discussion conversation you would like to share or read some of your poetry or share screen, you're very welcome to do that.
Yeah, I was thinking about things lost, but I was thinking about things that I found. And in the preface, sorry, I will not share my screen because I did not make a slide about that, but I thought about just now. I write about the thing that is found. So yeah, bear with me for a second. In 2023, at a talk at Kharkiv National University, the director of Archaeological Museum shared the story of a former student who joined the army and who, when inspecting abandoned Russian trenches, discovered an axe head that dated to the Bronze Age. Apparently, digging in, the Russian soldiers unintentionally entrenched themselves in a prehistoric camp. Russians didn't realize that they had uncovered an archaeological site. Fitting a wooden stick on the axe head, they used this priceless artifact as a meat cleaver in their field kitchen. During the liberation of the Kharkiv region in the fall of 2022, the fleeing Russian army took great care to take the most strategically important military necessities: washing machines, children's toys, a yellow boa constrictor from a private zoo, and so on. But the antique axe head, holding no value for them, was left behind in the field kitchen. And I was thinking that sometimes it is not even about the objects lost or found, but about the value that we see in them. Because now this axe of the Bronze Age is in the Kharkiv University Archaeological Museum as a new find. So yeah.
That's very important message to like remind ourselves that we also like still can find objects that were lost, or like find other objects that make much more importance for us in such moments like this. Yeah. So
yes, I can share also the poem. Maybe the one which unites all topics that we talked previously about nature and objects and basically even the valuable places which we lost. The poem is called Forest and Field Spirits. This is a translation by Amelia Glazer. She's a professor from Californian University in literature. The front is devouring my heart and my comrades, devouring all my words, and considers what's left of my body. Old legends told of the days when a giant would come. Every month they'd give it 10-15 of their best boys and girls to slake its hunger and buy the village a little peace. The earth is the gray zone. The earth in the gray zone periodically open its jaws for us to slake the war's hunger. We've offered ourselves to the war to slake its hunger and give our country a little peace. We're all waiting in line along crevice. None of us knows when, nor should we know. But our enemy is not giant. He is small and only takes small things in giant amounts. No wonder evil in the old legends appeared as a plague, as the small amassed into a giant amounts, as locusts that devoured the harvest like rats, as rats that are only dangerous when they are many, but can do nothing alone. Russia, you are this giant amounts of small. And we merged with our land by the color of our clothes, skin, blood, and way of life. We resemble somehow the forest and field spirits. They often show up for a first and the last time. It's our second year of seeing nothing but Donbas. And when we got leave for a few days to pass beyond its borders to another world, we still saw only this. Mines, slag heaps, and carries, the frontlines, boundary rivers, the exhausted people of war zones, mines washed away by rain in the gray zones, ruined vehicles, exit, exit, contact, field rations, and the uniform, the enemy's uniform and field rations, all mixed up. The world has formed a wedge to defend these lands, and even if there's something after that, even then, we'll probably never really need anything else. That's it. Yeah.
Can you remind us the name of this poetry and in which collection, so like possibly our listeners can find it later?
Forest and Field Spirits. This is design defense of presence. This second poetry book is translated in British publishing house Yantar, and in this November they are going to present it in London. I can send you the cover of the book so you can find it somewhere, maybe in Amazon or if it's interesting.
Thank you so much, Yaryna. It's truly convey and includes all of these topics that we just like touched on, and just very devastating to hear that, you know, this your writing can, you know, includes all of these very difficult topics and even to talk. But yeah, Viktoria, would you like also to share
more humor?
Yeah,
I wish it had more humor, but maybe it's later.
yeah, maybe it will be next stage of your writing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear your question.
Yeah, so if Viktoria, if you want, you can also share some of your writing, or like just reflect about the place of materiality and objects, and if, in addition to what you just said, yes, and is this truly like very important part of your writing, or you still try to focus more on positive stories than focusing on objects that are lost or forgotten or destroyed by the war or during the occupation?
Yeah. Thank you. I have an essay in this collection, like this one, like the only book I have so far. So it's very easy to find. It is called "What to Do with All the Russian Books," and it is my reflection on why I never read about the Donetsk River and about Kharkiv in literature, because all we had was the Soviet literature, and so I can read a little bit from it. Growing up 30 kilometers from the Russian border was, in a sense, like living in the vicinity of the Chernobyl power plant, where instead of radiation, the remainder of Sovietness leaked out. During the first years of Ukrainian independence, this decomposing Sovietness was still visible and palpable in every pore of our young Ukrainian state. Of course, for me, Ukraine was something internal, a silhouette fixated on my school map and my eyelids. But there were like a huge amount of these Russian books, and I never understood how those books got in, but they were in every house and flat that I saw. Mom explained that oftentimes Soviet people had to buy those books as an extra condition if they wanted to purchase something more practical, a winter jacket, leather boots, or toilet paper. At my friend's lake house by the fast step river Donetsk, I saw 3 identical volumes of How Steel Was Tempered by a Russian writer Ostrovsky. All 3 books were glued together, never touched by a human hand. They were lying there at a summer house from the dawn of time, like theater props. My friend's dad would read a 2-year-old gossip newspaper lying on a deck chair in between potato weeding sessions, but never Ostrovsky, God forbid. So.
Thank you, Viktoria.
So I think that what I was meaning to say with this is maybe because we still have a lot of difficult heritage as well that we don't know what to do with. And in the end of this essay, I do something with these books, right? But it is there are these objects that we lose, but there are also all these objects that we don't need anymore. And there is a big question today of how do we approach our own colonial past and our own all of these books.
Yeah, this is a truly important question. Thank you for touching this, Viktoria, because in many cities, like especially like in the east and the south, there is still important problem how to, you know, rebuild or restore this heritage once the war stopped, and what to do with this heritage and how to reflect on the colonial history of this land as a war, Russia's aggression, and the way how these landscapes and the cities and people are changed during the war. So it's likely will be an important topic of discussion within Ukrainian society, and it's already happening. As many of you know, here and in Lviv, there are many initiatives working on with socialist heritage, and here at the Center of Urban History as well. It's still we see how these destructions of colonial heritage are producing many more important ideas and topics for discussion. So and I hope your poetry will help us to find meanings to that. And I think now we are at the time of last question, and before going to a Q&A session, so our audience can ask your questions directly, and I invite our audience to put your question in Q&A, and then we will read them to our speakers. So my last question for you is about dreams. Dreams are something like positive, but could be also like, again, unfortunately, very problematic and difficult. Because when I was reading your writing, I come across the topic of dreaming during the war. It's a recurring topic in both of your texts, and maybe you can share with us briefly as much as you can, or like give some examples how we approach writing about such personal and sometimes sacred experience, and what it means to dream during the war, and how still you are finding the space to write about your reflections, about your thoughts and dreams while fighting, while living in the frontline city. So how to do this, and how you manage to write about dreams on such important and very difficult topics?
Well, to think about being long on war, like Russia did against us, is that everyone who is engaged in it dreams about very simple things, about time with relatives, with kids, with with husband or with wife. So it won't be exaggeration if I say that we all dream about families, first of all, about peaceful life with families, and it's biggest dream, I think, of every soldier here in Ukraine. And war makes everyone feel very exhausted. Like it looks like we all write in our texts that we become old when we are young, but it feels like we become very old. And so everyone dreams about some house or some place where no people, where peace and nature. And like our society demands a lot from militaries. I wrote a post from it. We already do a lot of stuff, but like we feel from the world and from even Ukrainian society that it must do even more, like become politicians after war, those who survived, like change our country for better, like be an example for everyone, despite the fact that we already, like, I think, example for a long time. But we all feel a big pressure, lots of demands on us, every day. And in this same time, dream about the most simple things. I have a poem in design, If We Stay Alive, it calls. I can't find it right now in English, but I can read out like a little, and you can read maybe later, that in this poem I'm writing about my dream, what we can do, me and my husband, who is also military and reconnaissance, if we stay alive. So I'm just numbering the things which we would do, like living somewhere in mountains, trying, me as urban person could try do some gardening, which I never tried actually before because I was growing up in Kiev, and I saw lots of firsts, of course, in army, but it's not gardening, and that we would have absolutely another perception of death after it's all, because all militaries feel like death become something very close to you, like friend even, who you see a lot of times. This is one of the images of these poems, and it will come to you as a guest and will do something with gardening with you. Yeah, something like this. And generally dreams on war like we have are not useful for soldiers. So because when you want to, and not when you want, when you need to be a good soldier, you should give up dreams, because dreams make you weaker, make you illusional, and we don't have illusion that will end very soon.
Thank you, Yaryna.
Yeah, thank you, Yaryna. And following up, I think that maybe it is because for us, the words of the military are way more and are more important now. Maybe that is why there is this tension and pressure on you, because I feel like I feel humbled and thinking, what can I say? My experience is absolutely uncomparable. And of course, like it's difficult to dream now. So we dream of peace, but the peace and one piece and another piece are very two different things. So I think that peace is impossible without justice. And yeah, that will be a long and difficult process. So I don't know what to say.
Yeah, probably will just add to your discussion, if I may, that there is significant pressure, as Yaryna mentioned, for soldiers in particular who are fighting in the front line, also for all Ukrainian society to be resilient. And this message about resilience is also like usually very overused, and still we should acknowledge that people deserve to live their normal life, being weak, being able to dream about normal life, but still important for us to remind this to the world and also to us, that here people are living their normal life, and they live in their life, and it won't be possible just like to stop living during the war, and we should still try to live and remind people in the world that, you know, it's not possible to be resilient all the time, and it's important to have this human image of Ukrainian fighters, Ukrainian soldiers, and Ukrainian society in general. So I think we're at the point when we can start inviting our audience to ask your questions. And I would like to thank you, Viktoria and Yaryna, for sharing your very touching and personal reflections about how you write, what you think about your writing, and how you find your own space, sharing your experiences with your readers. And thank you for being so honest with us and with our audience and readers. And I hope that many people will be able to read your poetry and prose once this session will stop, and yeah, it will be good to reflect more on your text later. And I invite Dr. Olga Maxwell to chair the Q&A session and to tell us what are the questions from audience to you. Thank you again, boss.
Once again, thank you very much, Yaryna and Viktoria. It was, I think it was very special to hear you read your work. We have the first question from Eric Shumsky. Could you please repeat the title of the book that contains the poem Forest and Field Spirits?
Yeah, it calls Design, like in Heidegger, design, defense of presence. And I actually plan to attach to the chat the cover of the book, but I can do that. Maybe I'll send it on WhatsApp right now to Iryna, and she can send it, right?
Mm-hmm. And we also have well, a very helpful comment from Hugh Roberts. Thank you so much. And there is a translation of the poem you were referring to, Yaryna. And so Hugh has written, that is the poem Yaryna mentioned, translated by Amelia Glaser with Fiona Benson and Hugh Roberts. So from Dasein. So forthcoming very soon from Janta Publishing. Thank you so much. This was very helpful, and everyone can actually read it. Do we have any other comments from the or questions from the audience? Or maybe the panelist. So possibly, so those who were involved in the organizing of these webinars. Let me see. Just keeping an eye on. No, okay. Let's see. There is a bit of silence.
We have a question from Marco Pavlishin in our webinar chat. Professor Marco Pavlishin here with us. Dear Marco, would you like to ask your question yourself, or should we read out loud?
Oh yes.
Okay, I'll simply paraphrase my question, which is to both Yaryna and Viktoria, whom I thank very much for both for the wonderful and deep reflections that you've shared with us, and also for the poems in Yaryna's case, and the fragment of prose that Viktoria read for us. I'm always curious about how people actually go about writing, under what circumstances they write, what makes them write. So could I ask both of you how you actually write? Do you wait for experiences, or do things happen which compel you then just spontaneously to make a kind of a special response to that experience in poetic form, or is it that you are able to distance yourself from the immediate situation sometimes, and to plan and to structure your creativity? Pardon me for asking such a personal question about your creative technique, but just genuinely interested in that.
Well, shall I start? Okay. Actually, most of my poems, they are written as epiphanies, I can say, especially in this, well, this is Ukrainian cover of this design, which I sent, second book. Most of them, like, it was written like I felt in myself a big something, this experience, and there was like one moment when I give it to the words, you know. But sometimes, of course, I have concepts. For example, I feel like war transforms some feelings or some even philosophical concepts. Like we have absolutely different perception in peaceful time and in wartime. Like I had a poem about what does it mean to be aged, you know, to be aged. Like it's very different when you are in war and when you're in peaceful time. And it was like idea, and I just wrote with a distance maybe, with intellectual maybe job, not only like epiphany or feeling about how it feels differently. What I meant that to be aged, like in modern world, lots of like young people, they are afraid to be aged because our world, you know, modern world say that you always should be young and do something like that. And when you are a soldier, you actually dreams of being aged because you understand that you probably won't in the war like we have, well, for example.
Yeah, thank you, Yaryna. It's very transcendental, beautiful that you're saying. For me, it's the differences between fiction and non-fiction. And fiction, of course, it's some scenes that come to your head and they follow you until you start writing them into the page to get rid of them. And with non-fiction, it's usually the other way around. You want to capture something for yourself from the life. And I have this essay here, my Azov Sea, and I started writing it half a year before the full-scale war. And I stopped in the middle and thought, who would ever read about Azov Sea? Who cares about Azov Sea? And I threw it into the long list of things that I have not finished. And then the full-scale invasion started, and I saw the Hnichynsk and all of these places being occupied instantly. And I thought, oh yeah, now I see. And I came back and finished, very painfully finished that essay, and it had meaning for me, and first of all, and then like some people read it. So I'm happy that some people know about it, not from the news, but from the history of myself with it.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Marko, for the question. We do have an image of the cover, but I don't seem to be able to share it with the participants, so I may need to work it out, and maybe we'll send it as a follow-up. I've just tried; it doesn't let me. Let me see. We also had someone posting a link where you can pre-order design. So let me just release it so that everyone can see it. Okay.
Yeah, maybe I can share, like, it will be the easiest way if possible. Yaryna just sent me an image, so it's how this book will look like. Yeah, it's the newest translation, and I also just saw Amelia Glazer like last week in Kiev. She shared that she was working with Yaryna. It was really nice to meet her translator in person, and to see, people.
She does a big job with translation. She's super attentive to all the nuances in this book.
If I may, maybe I could ask a quick question. So I'd like to ask Viktoria, because you also, your research project is very closely related to Kharkiv and the city of Kharkiv, and sort of how it changed, how it inspired your writing, what kind of things you've written in parallel as you get to know more about, the history, how it's changed, and
Well, yeah, like how it changed my creative writing or my research writing.
Creative.
Yeah. So I think that in the first year of the full-scale war, I could not write academic things. And my previous topic, my PhD started half a year before the full-scale war. And it was then called dedicated to rejuvenation of old factories in Kharkiv into art centers. Now, you can imagine that it was not very important in the first days of the full-scale war, and I felt so tired and exhausted of the academic language that I got lost, and the only things that I could write were essays and fictional stories. And then my supervisor said, well, this actually looks a little bit like anthropological writing. So you should write that in your PhD as well. So half of my PhD is also nonfiction now. So in a way, it's very, very interconnected and very closely related. And yeah, the Kharkiv itself is different, of course, and it's changing every day and every second, like every place. But for me, it became even more important and closer after the full-scale war, because when you know that you can lose it, and we can lose it all the time, it gains more significance. Yeah.
Thank you very much. We almost at the end, so 6:30. Are there any other questions from the audience? Just maybe for one more question? No. All right. So I think then we'll finish this webinar. So once again, thank you so much, Viktoria and Yaryna, for taking the time and joining us. And yeah, it was very, well, first of all, it was very powerful to hear your thoughts and your, you know, how you feel and how you experience the war and the writing. And thank you so much, Iryna, for organizing and inviting Yaryna and Viktoria.